Welcome to the special edition of the Steel Scorpion Sports Podcast, as we pay tribute to the late, great Bill Simmons.
Minor detail, he's actually still alive.
He's not dead?
No, just suspended.
Let me rephrase then. We will be paying tribute to the suspended Bill Simmons and Cousin Sal as we do our Steel Scorpion version of The Line Game. Mark, why don't you explain to the listeners who may not be familiar with this what we're doing here?
We're going to take the Week 5 schedule. We'll go through game by game, all 15, and we will try to predict or guess what we think the Vegas line is. And then I have my guesses written down here. I've gone through all the games. You've looked at yours. And then I've already looked up the actual spreads. I will say now that of the 15 games, 13 of these spreads came from sportsbook.com. The 2 games that involved the teams that played in tonight's Sunday night game, I had to look up from some site called footballlocks.com. So we will use those. But then the point system is we're going to use Ryder Cup style. Whoever's closest to the point spread will get a point. And if we tie, then we will each get a half point. That is, of course, the one change from the Simmons and Cousin Sal podcast that we don't like, where they give a tie or point to both of them. We will split it half and half, and at the end of the day, we will have 15 points in total, and we'll see who wins this week. We will do this 3 weeks in total, and whoever wins 2 of the 3 weeks, the winner will get to rename the team of the losing team in the Jaguar League, which is the multiplier league that we are in on Steel Scorpion Sports.
Yes, and if this is Ryder Cup scoring, I want you to start referring to me as Sir Jeff Miller, since I am clearly the European team.
We shall see about that. Then I will have to pull a victory for the U.S. since it's been a while.
We'll jump right into Week 5 then. So the first game, obviously, is the Thursday night game. Minnesota at Green Bay. Green Bay's coming off that big win over Chicago on the road, going back to the friendly, cozy confines of Lambeau Field. Minnesota, Teddy Bridgewater looked okay in the game against Atlanta. Got injured near the end, but everybody after the game said it's minor, should be ready for that. At least it gives them some hope. I'll say that Green Bay, though, is definitely going to be favored. They're favored by 5 points.
Just 5. Wow. That is pretty low. You may have forgotten that this game is being played at Lambeau Field. The Packers have a pretty good home field advantage. And they are a public team that people like to bet money on. And they just looked really good today, winning at Chicago. And despite the fact that Chicago was already 2-1, the Packers were a favorite in Chicago. So Vegas obviously has a fair amount of respect for the Packers. I guessed a line of 10. So I'm going to get this one. The actual line is 10.5.
Well, that's a good start for me.
Yeah, that is not a great start for you. Maybe you were forgetting that you were looking at a rookie quarterback playing at a team quarterbacked by Aaron Rodgers.
You didn't see the game today, so you can't speak of how great that rookie quarterback looked.
This is true. I only saw one game today, basically. I was at the Eagles and Niners games. Didn't get to see a lot of the other games, but I did see a few highlights at the halftime of Sunday Night Football. Bridgewater did look good and had a good stat line, but even still, we're talking about Aaron Rodgers here, who's a future Hall of Famer. And Thursday night, you're thinking of trend. There's been 4 Thursday night games so far. Every single game has been decided by at least 20 points. And obviously, if you think this game is going to be decided by at least 20 points, it's not going to be the Vikings winning by at least 20 points in Green Bay. Even with a line of 10, couldn't you see the Packers covering that?
I think you're forgetting Matt Asiata.
Well, I'm not too worried about that. Despite this big touchdown against the Falcons.
How about we check out the next line?
Yes. So next on the list we have the Ravens at the Colts. I'll do my spread for this one first. I did get to see some of the Colts game this morning. They looked good. They're at home, but of course the Ravens looked pretty good today as well. They blew the Panthers out of the water. My feeling was that Vegas would view the Ravens and the Colts as pretty evenly matched teams, and then they usually give about a 3-point edge to the home team. So my prediction line for this was Colts by 4.
Well, I think we're going to be very close on this. You didn't see Baltimore play because you were obviously away from the television at the San Francisco game, but Baltimore looked pretty impressive. my recommendation if you're betting this game is take the over. And I went with 3.5 for the Colts.
You were going to get this one because you got it right on the head. It is Colts by 3.5.
You can't see it, but I'm doing a little dance.
So we are now tied 1-1 with 13 games to go. Speaking of 13 games to go, isn't it kind of odd that in week 4 this week there were 6 teams on bye, including many fantasy relevant teams, the Broncos, the Seahawks, the Bengals, even the Cardinals with Fitzgerald and Ellington and Floyd and the Cardinal defense. And then in week 5, in the NFL's infinite wisdom, not only do we only have 2 teams on bye this week, but it's 2 of the least fantasy relevant teams in the NFL, the Raiders and the Dolphins, the teams that played in the London game. So of course they get a week off. Makes sense. No problem with that. But why couldn't 2 of this week's bye teams had a bye in week 5 so that we could have had 4 and 4 instead of 6 and 2? Can you explain that?
I can't explain that.
Okay, moving on to game 3. I'll let you give your analysis first. We have the Bears at the Panthers.
Bears at Panthers. So the Bears laid an egg at home today against Green Bay. Carolina laid an egg on the road at Baltimore. So 2 teams really coming off of strong performances. I will have to say that the Bears offense shouldn't look as bad. I think Green Bay, the familiarity there helps. I don't see Carolina being able to stop that. But to your point earlier, the home team usually gets a 3-point cushion from Vegas. So I'm saying that this is going to be Carolina still favored, but only by 1 point.
Yeah, I'm going to get this one. I nailed this one right on the head. I had Panthers minus 2.5, and it is 2.5. My thinking was that, kind of what you were saying, the Panthers and Bears, I think, biggest part of the season is fairly even, and then the Panthers get the 3-point bump for home field. And then I was just thinking, too, on the Packers-Bears game from this week, just the fact that the Packers were favored at Chicago, despite the fact that Chicago was 2-1 and won on the road at San Francisco, at the Jets, and still being a home dog for the Packers. And so I was just thinking Panthers 2.5, and that's where it landed. And it's kind of odd, the Bears are 2-2 now, but they're 0-2 at home and 2-0 on the road. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in Carolina.
Well, why don't we move along from our love for the Carolina Panthers and all things Cam Newton, move on to the next game, which has Cleveland visiting the Tennessee Titans.
Okay, you have a chance here. So, looking at this game, the Browns, of course, had a bye week this week, so they've had a couple extra week to prepare for this game. The Titans did not look good today. Not sure who's going to be starting in week 5, but then again, I'm not sure that it even matters all that much. I came down to a line of the Titans being favored by 1.5 points.
Wow, Titans 1.5. So you thought Cleveland was eating into that 3-point advantage you get for being at home.
Cleveland hasn't looked so bad this year. They beat the Saints. They hung tight in another couple games. They were close with Pittsburgh. They were close with Baltimore in week 3. So, and just the Titans, wow. Won in week 1. They looked impressive. They won into Kansas City, always a tough place to win. They looked good doing it. The Chiefs were never really in that game. But now they lost 3 in a row, and I think people are kind of starting to see the true Titans emerge.
Yeah, and I will say, if Jake Locker played, I'd probably have more confidence in Tennessee after watching whatever that was at quarterback today for Tennessee. I believe they call him Charlie Whitehurst, but I'm not 100% sure that there's anyone in the NFL that plays quarterback named Charlie Whitehurst. Didn't look like it today.
Yeah, he didn't look so impressive, but, Locker hasn't looked that great either, and it could be that, maybe by week 6 or 7, maybe Zach Mettenberger is the starter as they try to see what they have for next year, because Locker's contract is out at the end of this year. They chose not to extend him. I can say with probably 85 to 90% confidence that Jake Locker will not be on the Titans next year.
All right, so my number for the line is actually not a number at all. It's 2 words. Pick 'em.
Wow, you nailed it on the head. So you get this one, and now through 4 games we have 2-2. And made it quite a nice recovery from the first game. The first game you were off by 5 points, and I was generally worried for you. I thought that this might be embarrassing if you were off by that many points in every game. But since then, you've nailed 2 on the head. So nice job.
Well, thank you. I do like to think I know a little about gambling.
Yes, we have placed a fair amount of bets in our lifetime.
Legal, all of them legal.
Oh, of course. Who would think of doing anything otherwise?
So the next game would be St. Louis at Philadelphia. Philly, as you may know, Mark, from seeing the game in San Francisco, did not look very impressive on offense today. In fact, of the 3 touchdowns they scored, none of them were scored by the offense. I do believe that part of that offensive looking out of sync was that they had 3 plays that took the ball away from the offense. So the fewer possessions you get, and we've seen this in the past with the Peyton Manning, Tom Brady rhythm offenses, if you don't actually get the ball to get in a rhythm, it's rather hard to then get into a rhythm. So while it sounds great to have a blocked punt and a punt return and a pick six, it turns out you didn't get the ball to your offense, so when you needed them to make a play, they hadn't made a play all day, so they weren't ready. That being said, St. Louis is starting someone named Austin at quarterback. That never bodes well in the NFL. I think the betting public is going to be leaning towards Philly, having a rebound game here. The NFC East always gets a lot of publicity and a lot of money rolls through those games. So I went pretty strong on Philly, and I went Philly -6.
Philly -6. Well, I will keep you in suspense for a little bit. Part of my analysis was, of course, I was at the game today. The Eagles' offense did not look good. At one point, halfway through the second quarter, it was 21-10 Eagles. I looked up at the scoreboard. They have a nice, huge, big scoreboard at the new stadium. They have all the running offensive stats. And the Eagles at that point had 2 first downs, 47 yards of offense, and hit 21 points on the scoreboard. So not something that you typically see. I wasn't too surprised, though, that the Eagles' offense was a little bit out of sync. The 49ers were in not necessarily a must-win game, but they kind of needed that game. You had to figure that Harbaugh had them fired up. They hadn't won at home yet in the new stadium. They knew that if they lost, they were going to drop to 1-3, and at which point their odds of making the playoffs would have probably fallen to 10%, maybe 15% max. So they definitely knew they had to play this, win this game, and the defense stepped up. They did a good job. But the Eagles at home versus the Rams, I came up with a line of 8, and the actual line is 7. So we're both 1 off. So Ryder Cup style, we're both going to have to play for this one.
All right, let's have the whole.
So now 5 games, 2.5 for me, 2.5 for you, 10 more games to go. The next game on our slate is the Falcons at the Giants. So the Giants had a little bit of extra rest for this one. They played on Thursday night, looked really good. The Falcons didn't really see any of the game today. I don't know what happened, but they somehow lost at Minnesota to a team with no Adrian Peterson, to a team with a rookie quarterback making his first start. I pegged the Giants as a 4-point favorite. What say you?
I am also leaning towards the Giants in a larger than home field advantage way. Again, East Coast, big money city. NFC East gets a lot of publicity. Atlanta, not a lot of betting goes on in Atlanta is my take. I don't think they swing betting pools too much. And after you lose at Minnesota and you let Matt Asiata look like Adrian Peterson in a stat line, I think that's going to make the Vegas guys push a little more towards New York. So I went with the G-Men at 4 points.
So we had the same guess for that one, and we were both close. The actual line is 4.5. So we were both off by a half, and we both get another half point.
Very impressive, though, that our logic was sound, and we were within half a point of the line.
Yeah.
We'll just move on to the next game, then.
Yeah, sounds good.
It is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the New Orleans Saints. Now, those that listened to the podcast last week at SteelScorpionSports.com would have heard us pretty much belittle the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And one of our longtime listeners, Lovey Smith, apparently used that to fire his team up. And they went out this week and destroyed many parlay bets that had the Pittsburgh money line involved in them. Thank you, Lovey. On the other hand, New Orleans, after last season's destruction of the Cowboys, goes into Dallas, playing in the Sunday night game against what was supposed to have been a historically bad defense, and doesn't score in the first half. Wow, so we have 2 teams heading in opposite directions. And so I'm going to, of course, say New Orleans is going to be favored by 8. The Superdome is a ridiculous place to play, as we all seen in past games. They don't lose at home. All 3 of their losses this year in their 1-3 record were on the road. If they have any hope of making the playoffs, they got to win the home games, and they usually win them big.
Okay, well, we have our 3rd straight tie. I also predicted Saints by 8. I think what happened here, I had some of the same logic as you. I think we both kind of overcorrected based on what we saw today. I came in, when I pegged it at 8, I was thinking that before today, the line might have been 11 or 12. But then the Bucks go into Pittsburgh and win. The Saints, looked pretty bad tonight, down 24-0 at halftime. It was 31-3 midway through the 3rd. And I think maybe we both overcorrected. So the line is actually 11, which is kind of what I thought it would be, prior to today's games. But I think maybe Vegas still has faith in the Saints, especially at home, and thinking that, maybe the Bucks were just playing desperate today. They couldn't afford to fall to 0-4, knowing that they had to play at the Saints within the division the following week. So, Vegas still believes in the Saints, and they pegged it at 11.
All right. We'll have that hole as well.
Yes, we will. 4 straight ties, 3 straight ties, but hopefully one of us wins this next one so we can break the streak of ties here. So the next game I'll start us with, we have the Texans at the Cowboys. So we have a intra-state of Texas battle. And they do this every 4 years, of course, with the Texans and the Cowboys. I think the state of Texas gets up for this game. Of course, the Cowboys will get up for this game because the Cowboys have, been in Dallas. They see themselves as, not only the team of Texas, but they see themselves as America's team. So they definitely want to beat these the startup Texans here that have surprisingly been in the league for quite a while now. I can remember when they, first started their first season with David Carr as their QB, and now his kid brothers in the league. But Cowboys at home, they looked really good tonight, 3-1. The Texans, they're 3-1 as well, but when you look at who they've beaten Buffalo, they've beaten Washington, they lost to the Giants. I can't remember the other team they beat, but it was a very good team as well. And so I picked the Cowboys as a 6-point favorite.
The Cowboys looked great tonight. They've been running the ball well, and honestly, I think the back injury to Tony Romo may have been great for them. They are still a little worried about him, so they run the ball more, and it turns out that's a really effective way for them to win. DeMarco Murray's actually a pretty good running back. He hasn't gotten hurt yet. I said yet. And they're able to control the clock, move the ball down the field, set up the play action, play to Tony's strengths instead of the gunslinger where he loses games. Houston, as you mentioned, 3-1 as well. Looking pretty solid from a record standpoint, but really when you struggle to put Buffalo away and it takes a J.J. Watt, nice 70-some yard interception return for a touchdown to turn the tide in the game, that really did change the game, and you end up holding off Buffalo. Good for you, but I'm not buying into it. I thought, again, NFC East, big team, big market, perhaps the most publicized team in America. I went 5.5.
You're going to get this one. The actual spread is 5, but I'm playing under protest because I think Vegas is wrong on this one. I think that people probably should bet on this. I just remembered the Texans' other win was against the Raiders. So they've beaten Washington in week 1. They beat the Raiders in week 2. Now they've beaten Buffalo. They lost at the Giants. So, and that's the, probably the best team that they've played, and they lost out by 13. So I just, you get this one, the line is 5, but I think that line is too low, and I think the line should be higher.
The next game on our docket, speaking of those Buffalo Bills, is the Buffalo Bills at the Detroit Lions. You may not have seen all the action today, but again, Buffalo had a chance against Houston. They actually looked semi-competent early in the game, had a lead, blew it with the pick six, had to come back late, didn't actually complete it, but their hot start, I think we mentioned on the podcast last week as well, a mirage. I think that's what we're seeing here. Detroit, on the other hand, good victory for them. Matt Stafford led the Jim Caldwell offense, as we'll call it now. It's a little more conservative. Apparently they use Calvin Johnson more as a decoy than as a receiver, which is an interesting concept. So glad to see they're really making good use of Megatron. But if you look at their record, they're sitting atop the NFC North. They've got Buffalo coming in. They know they've got to win these games. So I think up in Ford Field, You got to give Detroit probably about a 5-point cushion.
5-point cushion, okay. I'm going to get this one, and we're going to be back in a tie again. I came up with a line of 7.5. The line is actually 7. I just don't think the Bills are that good. I know they started 2-0. They somehow won in Chicago in week 1. That was a bit of an upset. And then in week 2, home against Miami. Miami is not that great of a team. They were playing on the emotion. Their home opener in Ralph Wilson Stadium. They were honoring Ralph Wilson. Jim Kelly was there, free of cancer. They were celebrating the fact that they had a new owner that was going to keep them in Buffalo. And then, they didn't look good their last 2 weeks. The Lions have looked good. They're 3-1. They just went on the road, beat the Jets. They beat Green Bay the previous week. And so I just gave them a 7.5-point spread, and the actual line is 7. So they are a touchdown favorite, and I'm guessing that they will be in quite a few parlays across America this weekend.
Survivor pools, parlays, money lines, I would not be surprised.
Yes, it looks pretty solid to me. I'd have to think that they win that. The next game on our docket is the Steelers at the Jaguars. Amazingly, this is the first game of all the ones that we've talked about where I actually pegged the road team as the favorite. And the Jaguars, wow. With the Bucs getting a win today, the Jaguars and the Raiders are now the only 2 teams without a win. Looking at this game, back to this one, the Jaguars are bad. The Steelers didn't look good today. They lost at home to the Bucs, of course, but that's also going to motivate them to come out and get this game. They know they can't lose this and fall to 2-3. So I picked the Steelers as a 7.5-point favorite.
7.5? Wow. Well, you went a little higher than I did, so that I'll keep you in suspense as my number. But if you already know the number's higher, then you're in good shape. But for all the same reasons you said, the Jags looked horrid. They're young. I believe they're one of the 3 youngest teams in the league, maybe even the youngest. I think Bradley's going to need a couple more years if they give it to him to really get that defense playing at the level he had in Seattle with the right pieces. Then be able to, hopefully find that Blake Bortles is the quarterback of the future and build some weapons around him so that the offense can do stuff. Right now, there's not much there. Pittsburgh had a ton of undisciplined penalties. So if they can just tighten up the discipline, you get 100 yards back of hidden yardage in the game, you don't lose to the Bucs. So I think Mike Tomlin, being a pretty good coach, he's going to shore that up this week. They're going to come up motivated in Jacksonville with the tarp over the upper seats, which always makes it a daunting place to play with the noise echoing off the billowing tarp. And I think Pittsburgh's going to get 6 points.
So the Steelers is a 6-point favorite. You're going to get this one. The actual line is 6.5, so I was off by 1 point, and you were off by a half point. So through 10 games, you are at 5.5 to 4.5 with 5 games to go.
And the first of those 5 is the meat of the schedule. Arizona at Denver. Most of the nation should be seeing this one. So you've got Arizona 3-0 coming off the bye, going into Denver 2-1, coming off that impressive comeback in Seattle that fell just short in overtime, but also coming off the bye, because as you mentioned earlier, there's no reason not to have 6 teams on bye in week 4. Going to Mile High, playing at altitude, the Broncos coming off a loss, Manning coming off a loss. None of that bodes well for Arizona. Also, Denver with Manning has been a pretty big money team. Money seems to flow towards their number. People like the offense there. People don't know a lot about Arizona's team. It's been more on defense. Carson Palmer with a nerve injury, all sorts of question marks. So Denver always tends, with the Manning-led offense, to get some pretty potent numbers. So I actually gave him a touchdown and said Denver 7 over an undefeated team.
We're going to tie on this one. I said 7 as well for a lot of the same reasons that you said. They're a public team. They're coming off a bye. They have Peyton Manning. At this point, we're not sure who's actually going to start for the Cardinals, whether it's Drew Stanton or Carson Palmer. But at the same time, Stanton has won his last 2 games, so I'm not sure that it even matters that much. So just like you, I came up with the 7-point line, and the actual line is 7.5, which is an interesting spread. I mean, just over a touchdown, so kind of makes it a little bit difficult to bet. If you think the Broncos are going to win this game, do you buy the points to get it down to 7? Do you just put it in a teaser to get that spread down to like 1.5 if you use a 6-point teaser, maybe just bet the money line. But, Vegas knows what they're doing. They know that most of the money is going to be on the Broncos, so they make them 7.5. Just makes it a little bit more intriguing.
Yeah, throwing that hook on there always makes it a little more interesting.
Yep. So we tie on that one. So I think now it is, what was it before? It was 5.5 to 4.5. So now it is 6 to 5. So you have a 1-game lead with 4 to go. And the next of those is the Kansas City Chiefs at the San Francisco 49ers. So saw the Niners play today. Like I mentioned before, I think they were kind of in a desperation mode. They knew they had to win. They could not afford to fall to 1-3. The defense looks pretty good today. The offense, okay, nothing great. They had 4 field goals and only 2 touchdowns, but that was enough to get the win. The Chiefs, we don't know what they've done this week. They're going to play tomorrow night. They're going to play the Monday night game against the Patriots. That's in Kansas City, but of course they are going to have the short week and then have to travel to San Francisco. I think the Niners are more of a public team than the Chiefs. I think that Vegas respects the Niners based on what they've done the last few years and with Coach Harbaugh. So I picked the Niners as an 8-point favorite.
But that's a pretty hefty number there to be thrown out on the Niners. And as you said, their offense has been pretty pedestrian. Didn't even look good today when they put up 26 points today?
Yeah, 26 points, 4 field goals, and 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, lots of field goals, couldn't punch it in. The running game, while it did look a little more on track, hasn't been as impressive as advertised. And Kaepernick, his accuracy just isn't there so far this year. Contrary to what some pundits on certain networks say, Colin Kaepernick is not the next greatest quarterback in the league, at least not to this point. But, and there is a but there, Kansas City, as you said, coming off the short week, coming off a game against New England, which I'm anticipating they'll probably lose. They've had massive injuries across the defense. This doesn't feel like a spot that Kansas City goes in and competes. Vegas has to know that. San Francisco, the bigger name, the bigger reputation. So I was not quite as impressed with them as you, so I went with 6.
I'm going to get this one. The actual line is 7.5.
Boo on Vegas. The hook, they threw another hook in, and it cost me. Boo on Vegas.
Yeah. They know what they're doing. They've been setting lines for at least 2 or 3 years now. I don't think I don't think they did sports betting before 2011. I think, but
well, actually,
they know what they're doing.
I've been following it at least since 2008, so clearly it's been around that long.
Okay, we'll give them credit for 6 years at least then. So,
but we're fairly certain though they build those big casinos because you win, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Good.
Speaking of Kaepernick, since you touched on him, he's a great athlete. He's a good runner. He picked up some first downs today with his speed, but he just seems, when there's pressure and he has to run around, he seems flustered. Like he's not a great passer. He's not a great thrower of the football, if that makes sense. And I watched the Florida State Clemson game a couple weeks ago when Winston was suspended, and they had Sean McGuire in there, the redshirt sophomore, I think he was. And Clemson was bringing a lot of pressure, and McGuire just looked like a deer in the headlights a lot. And I saw some plays today that from Kaepernick that reminded me of the redshirt sophomore Florida State quarterback. So I don't think that speaks too well of him, but he has John Harbaugh as a coach. I think Harbaugh is kind of a QB whisperer, being a former QB himself. So I think Kaepernick still has a chance, but I think the jury might still be out on him. So we'll see what he develops into. And then you can get us going on the next game, which is Jets at the Chargers.
That's right. We move from your neck of the woods to mine. The Jets, after another great demonstration of futility on offense today, laying a mediocre to bad performance out on the field again against the Lions, will travel across the country and play the San Diego Chargers, who, after 4 weeks, look to be the real deal. Their only loss is to the undefeated Arizona Cardinals. In fact, I saw a stat today that going into today's game, the 3 teams that San Diego had played were a combined 7-2. The 2 losses being to the Chargers. So the only teams that people have been losing to that they had played prior to today were the Chargers. Now today they definitely showed Jacksonville the door quickly. They took care of Blake Bortles. It wasn't much of a contest. It's not a good barometer to use for the future. But the Jets, with their inept offense coming out here, the San Diego defense looks to be for real. The secondary with Brandon Flowers now and Eric Weddle, everything looks to be clicking. They're coming together nicely. Phillip Rivers is underrated as a quarterback. He actually puts up good numbers, throws funky, moves around a little stiff, looks funny, but he produces results. So I think even without a running game, which they did not have, and against the Jets you usually don't have because the Jets stopped the run, I think it'll be Phillip Rivers picking the secondary apart. And I think the Jets, while they are an East Coast team, they get a little money action going, so that'll bring it back a little under what I would have anticipated. But I still think San Diego is going to be getting 5 points from the Sharks.
5 points. Okay. I went a little higher than you. The Chargers, like you said, are 3-1. They are really close to being 4-0. Their one loss was in that the last game of Week 1, the late night Monday Night Football doubleheader when they were played in Arizona. They led for the majority of that game. Arizona came back, won by 1 point. The Chargers, and of course the Cardinals are 3-0, so the Chargers are really close to being 4-0. Also with this game, you have the Jets flying across the country, going all the way from East Coast to West Coast. The Jets have a suspect secondary. Phillip Rivers is a QB that can take advantage of that. He's got some receivers. Keenan Allen and somehow Malcolm Floyd and Eddie Royal are looking good. And of course he also has Gates and Darius Green as well. So even though they don't have much of a running game, he can take advantage of that Jets secondary. And I picked the Chargers as an 8-point favorite. And this is the third straight game that we've talked about where the Vegas line is 7.5. So I'm going to get this one.
Well, I can't blame the hook for that one. So why don't you lead us in with 2 to go? It looks like you now have a 1-game lead.
I have a 1-game lead with 2 to go, and so the second to last game is the Sunday night primetime game next week. This should be a good game. Hopefully it's a better game than tonight's Sunday night game. We have the 3-0 Cincinnati Bengals at the, I'm going to go ahead and assume, 3-1 Patriots if they beat the Chiefs on Monday night. Otherwise they'll be 2-2. So this should be a pretty good game. The Bengals have looked really solid, have a good defense. Andy Dalton has played well. They have some weapons with A.J. Green and Giovanni Bernard. Patriots, of course, at home, prime time. We're in with, the kind of a public team. They're going to get money on them. And I kind of figured that Vegas would see them as fairly equal, and then the Patriots getting credit for home field. I take the Patriots as a 2.5-point favorite.
Well, I agree that the Patriots will be favored. Same reasons you said. They're the East Coast team. They've got the money on them. People don't trust Andy Dalton. Even coming off the bye, Cincinnati, while they have looked impressive, people are probably still uncertain how good they are. I will say Cincinnati last year, for those that don't remember, hosted New England, and I believe that's the game Tom Brady did not throw a touchdown pass. The Bengals and that defense pretty much manhandled the Patriots offense and were able to win an ugly game. If you're thinking of other wagers, the under may be the way to go in this game because New England's offense has not been clicking prior to the Kansas City game. Cincinnati, while the offense has looked good in spurts so far, going into New England's always difficult. That being said, I went straight up on the home field advantage line and gave New England credit for all 3 points.
You got this one on the head. It is 3 points, which puts us tied at 7-7 heading into the final game. So this one will decide it. It's the Seahawks at Washington.
It is the Monday Night Special, Seahawks at Washington. So Seattle gets to play in prime time. Seattle at Washington. Washington looked really, really bad on Thursday night. Kirk Cousins looked like he wasn't sure which team he was on. He was throwing the ball to whomever indiscriminately, blue jerseys, yellow, red jerseys, whatever. So this time, with Seattle's defense coming into town, I don't love his chances of improving on that. Seattle, coming off a bye, the big overtime victory against the Broncos when they probably felt like they needed to step up and show the world after the San Diego loss in Week 2 that they were still a team to reckon with. So they definitely performed well there. They're coming across the country, though, and on the road they have not been as dominant as they've been at home. See the San Diego game and see the Carolina game on the road last year. So while I think Seattle's favored, I didn't want to give them too much credit, so I went with Seattle -5.
All right, well, I will end the suspense right now and let you know that I'm going to get this last one. I took Seattle at 6.5-point favorites. They're actually a 7.5-point favorite, which means 4 of the last 5 games we talked about are 7.5-point spreads. That leaves people with quite a few choices for teasers this week, because you have those 4 games at 7.5, and then the Lions are a 7-point favorite at home against the Bills, and the Eagles are a 7-point favorite at home against the Rams. That's a total of 7 games. They're at 7 or 7.5. And then I'll add in one more. The Steelers on the road are 6.5 at the Jags. So almost half the schedule next week is right around a touchdown. I went with 6.5 just thinking of Washington is bad. It was really bad on Thursday. They're going to have a little bit extra rest since they played on Thursday, but yet they're not, because they're playing an opponent that had a bye last week, so they're going to get the full 2 weeks of preparation. And then, Washington wants to either one win is against the 0-4 Jaguars. So I don't see them giving any much of a competition to the defending Super Bowl champions. And so I guess at the full line is 7.5, and quite a few teaser options this week. Which out of those games, which do you think, if you were to do a 2-team teaser, which do you like the best?
I'd have to say 2-team teaser, I'm going to take New Orleans. With New Orleans playing at home, I can get that down to a reasonable number in a teaser, and I may not even care about teasing that, because New Orleans will most likely decimate Tampa Bay. When they win at home, they win big. So I'd throw New Orleans in, and I'd probably throw Seattle in. They're going to win on the road. They might not win it pretty, they might not win big, because again, the suspect part of Washington's defense last week was the secondary. Russell's looked good, but he hasn't looked great, and they try and run the ball and control the clock that way. They don't always blow people out, and especially on the road, they're just content with a win. So I could see them winning, but winning closer than that 7.5-point line. So throwing that into a teaser would make me feel a little better. What about you?
I actually have some different ones. I think my top 2 favorites are probably a couple of West Coast games. I like the Niners, 7.5-point favorite against the Chiefs, and then the Chargers, 7.5-point favorite at home against the Jets. I don't see the Jets going across the country and beating the Chargers. Their defensive backfield is just not good enough to stop Phillip Rivers. And then the Chiefs having to do with the Niners. The Niners have some momentum now. They won a big game against the 3-0 Eagles today. They're 2-2. They need to get to 3-2. I don't see either of those road teams winning. And if you tease those down to like a 1.5-point spread, just needed to win by 2. I see them doing that. If I had to throw in a third one, I don't like doing it as much on a road team, but Steelers, 6.5-point favorite at the Jags. The Steelers are going to be mad. They're going to be pissed that they've swapped at home to the Bucs. They're going to come out guns blazing. I don't see any chance of the Steelers, even though it's on the road. I don't see how they lose to the Jaguars.
Did you see how they were going to lose to Tampa Bay at home?
Yeah, that's pretty embarrassing, but
I'm just saying, the Jags aren't going to go winless. Last year they started 0-8, finished up 4-4, so they weren't horrible. But when they got to like 0-5, 0-6, everybody was starting to talk about a winless season. This Jags team is probably better than that one. They're not going to go winless. Bortles will have his growing pains, but he's going to win a game or 2 or 3. And where are they likely to win games? Are they likely to win on the road or at home? I'm going to go with at home.
I hear you. I'm just going with a team that has a veteran quarterback. You're talking about Ben Roethlisberger with 2 Super Bowl rings versus Dick Bortles, who will be making his 2nd career start. You're talking about a young coach going against Mike Tomlin, who's won a Super Bowl. Steelers defense is banged up a little bit, but again, I just think, looking at motivation-wise, they're going to be pissed off if they lost at home to the Bucs. They can't go to Jacksonville, lose, and fall to 2-3. So anything is possible. The game I went to today, people thought they was going to follow a certain pattern. If you look at the first few weeks, the Eagles, had fallen behind in every game by at least 10 points and had to catch up. And the Niners, had leads. They had a lead against Arizona in week 3 and they lost. They had a big lead against Chicago in week 2 and they lost. Today's game was the exact opposite. Philadelphia had a lead. They led for a good portion of the game. They were ahead at halftime. And then San Francisco, who had scored, I think, 3 second-half points all season, came back and got the points they needed in the second half to win. So The NFL is very hard to predict. You never know what's going to happen, but I have to say I would be pretty shocked if the Steelers lost to the Jaguars next week.
Oh, I would completely agree with you on that front. The Jags winning that game would be a total shock. I'm just saying. I'm glad it was your third favorite, not one of your top two favorites, because in my stratosphere of favorites, it was further down the pecking order than the top few.
And there's so many to choose from this week. I didn't even mention, Lions 7-point favorite home against the Bills. Again, like I said, anything can happen. Maybe the Bills kind of turn things around, but I don't see the Lions losing at home that game either to the Bills. Quite a few, and even the Cowboys at home against the Texans, it's a 5-point favorite. You can tease that all the way down to Cowboys +1. The Texans are decent. They have a decent defense. And of course, would have a chance to win in Dallas, but the way Dallas has looked so far, even their one loss, with the home week 1 to the 49ers, and, you can almost blame that. Tony Romo had some bad turnovers. The 49ers got out ahead early, and the Cowboys just couldn't come back, but, lots and lots of, out of the 15 games this week, there's only 2 road favorites, and both of those are favored by, 6.5 and 7.5, playing against 2 pretty bad teams, so I would say, with 13 home favorites, I wouldn't be surprised if we have 11 or 12 home winners this week.
Wow. But in the year of the dog, as Bill Simmons and others have declared this, they may win, but will they cover? That's really the question for gamblers out there. Take any of our advice with a grain of salt. But there you have it, the line game this week. It appears that, Mark, you have won by 1. So the first week goes to you. We shall see how I get my revenge next week.
Yeah, look forward to week 2. This was pretty close, 8-7, so you can't get really much closer than that. I haven't looked ahead to week 6 yet. I'm not sure how many teams are on bye. Hopefully it's just 4. I think the next 2 weeks with 6 teams on bye is not until week 9 and 10. But so with 4 teams on bye in week 6, I think we should have about 14 games to prognosticate next week.
That's right. And in the interim, everyone, free Bill Simmons. Good luck with your 3-week suspension from ESPN. Mark and I will fill in, hopefully admirably, in the next 3 weeks, doing our version of the line game. And for those that want to follow us for this and other podcasts, you can find us at steelscorpionsports.com. Check us out. We're a new breed of fantasy football. We've got multipliers, mulligans, the all-play format. steelscorpionsports.com, a better species of fantasy football. Signing off from San Diego, I'm Jeff Miller.
Signing off from San Jose, I'm Mark Hefflin.
All right, everybody. We'll see you on the Week 4 summary podcast, which should be posted later this week.